Hello everybody, Don here. On today's episode of The Naturalist, I'm visiting the home of Lauren Craig, a permaculture designer, and we're in her front yard food forest. This represents another interest of mine and an interest of a lot of people, and that is how to grow your own food in a sustainable manner and an aesthetically pleasing manner and have fun with it while you do it. So let's join Lauren for a tour of her homestead. Hi Lauren, this is Lauren. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for coming. I am a permaculture designer and homesteader, and I've been homesteading for the past 10 or so years. And I've been here at this property for 2 years. And when I first moved here, it was nothing but grass in this front yard. And I sit on an acre. And so naturally, I would rather, grow food than grow grass. So I decided to embark upon the journey of getting rid of all my grass in the front yard and planting food and medicine instead.
Awesome.
And so I was able to do this whole transformation, get rid of the grass in a year. And then I've just been kind of building it up ever since then.
Wow, it's just in a quick view of the area, it's just incredible the transformation you've made in this area, given what it apparently started as. Yeah,
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah,
So let's see some of the highlights of your homestead here.
So everything's looking a little different as we're transitioning, of course, into fall, and so things are kind of dying back a bit. But around the edge of the entirety of my yard, I have a perennial border. So there's a mix of a lot of things. Of course, as you can see, strawberries represent the primary ground cover of this space. And the reason I have had those as my ground cover is, of course, because they're medicinal, or not medicinal, they are edible. And also they, provide a living mulch for everything that surrounds them and grows around them. And their roots are fairly superficial, so they're not really, robbing nutrients from things around them. And they're actually nitrogen fixing. So they are actually adding some nitrogen back into the soil as well.
Okay.
And then, of course, again, they produce strawberries, and there's nothing, there's only good things to love about that.
So for people who wouldn't recognize that term, nitrogen fixing, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so nitrogen fixing plants grab nitrogen from the atmosphere and store it in their root nodules. Is that correct? And then that makes them available to the rest of the plants that surround them then. I hope I
sure.
said that
Yeah,
correctly. So, it can be wonderful to stack multiple uses for a plant. And so that's what I'm using the strawberries for. And so as you can see, they're kind of slowly taking over the space. And in the spring, I'll go ahead and take all of these cuttings, and I will use them to propagate, new strawberries all over my property.
So what, for our viewers, what is this process called that strawberries are doing here? What are they doing?
Yeah, they are putting out their runners. So this is where they kind of make the attempt to create more life. And so they send out their wonderful arms, and they go ahead then and take root and create a new plant. And you can always, of course, snip that, and then this will just be a new, mother plant. But as long as you keep bearing the runners, they will just keep on producing.
Sure.
So they're a wonderful gift. Yeah. And so then I've just got kind of a mix of things. I had to kind of redo this area. I had one plant in particular, albeit useful, it was taking over. And so I kind of redid this space. But as you can see, we've got a mixture of, there's some rhubarb, there's some horseradish here, I've got some catnip, and then I've got some hazelnut. I've got hazelnuts and hydrangeas kind of spaced out up there. And so, of course, over, many years, that will grow up and provide more of like a canopy for this area. And on the other side, I've also got, I've got lilacs, and I've got hydrangeas over there as well. And I also have a pawpaw on the end, but I'm trying to kind of fill this space with more native shrubs and trees.
Mhm.
And then I'm also going to eventually pop in some evergreens so that I have some year-round coverage.
Mhm.
Um,
So what's the importance of using native trees and shrubs and plants as much
Yeah.
as possible in
Yeah.
this process?
So utilizing native vegetation is really important because then, of course, you're supporting native, wildlife and an ecosystem,
Mhm.
and you're providing a place for, for instance, moths and butterflies and other beneficial insects that are actually native to the area to continue to produce and proliferate and,
Mhm.
have healthy populations.
Mhm.
And if we don't have those native, that native vegetation surrounding us, then of course we don't have we don't have the habitat to support the life that we want.
Mhm. The
in our
bees, the
area.
butterflies,
Of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Okay.
So let's see here. And I love mullein. Mullein is one of my favorite medicinal plants, and it's also one of, it's a native wildflower.
So some people would think that's a weedy, right? So
Yes.
what do you use it for? What do people like that for?
Yeah, so I love mullein. What we do is we actually will harvest the leaves,
Mhm.
and then we go ahead and string them up and
Mhm.
hang them and let them dry. And they're really good for congestion. So for kind of clearing up congestion, and so you can actually, interestingly enough, you can smoke them. I've
Mhm.
never tried it that way, but you can actually crumble them up, and this is the way I tend to do it. And I'll use them in teas with things like hyssop, which I have over there,
Mhm.
and of course echinacea, and so that can really help in times of cold and flu.
Mhm.
And so what I'll do is I actually save, and actually the flowers themselves, you can set them in olive oil and make mullein oil, which is a really good earache oil. So we've done that too. But I like to let it all dry out, and then I'll just take the stalk and I'll shake them around everywhere because
Mhm.
I love how they look. They almost look otherworldly, the way that they grow.
They are furry for one.
They
Yeah,
are,
that
aren't
makes them
they?
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Mhm.
And let's see here. And then over in this corner, I like this little space. It's starting to kind of be taken over, of course, by the ground covers.
Mhm.
But I've got elderberry in the corner, and then I've got a plum tree right over here. And then I've got a fig. Let's see here.
Is your fig cold hardy, or what do you do to keep that fig alive over the winter?
Yeah, it is cold hardy. I don't do anything in particular.
Mhm.
Because it
Okay.
is cold hardy. It tends to come up beautifully each year.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I know that there are some efforts taken, but I haven't had.
If you hadn't had to,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Tell us about this plant right here.
Yes, this is cotton. And
Yeah.
I was really excited because I've never grown cotton before. And I was shocked with how beautiful and actually ornamental it is.
Oh, absolutely.
And so after it flowers, and really, so they produce these white and pink flowers, and they're really beautiful. And then after they bloom, they begin forming the cotton ball, actually BOLL. And it's like, this is an example of one that's kind of newly formed. And then they just grow and grow and grow until they are done growing and they burst forth, which I haven't yet had one fully expand and open. And we don't have quite the grow season,
Mhm.
to produce much cotton.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to kind of try my hand for fun. So there are a couple that are getting close, but none that are quite there yet.
Yeah,
So those have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've not been up this close to a cotton plant myself.
Yeah.
And I do know, though, from the agricultural world, that cotton is a heavy pesticide-dependent plant,
Right.
especially in large cotton-grown regions. I don't see any damage on this plant.
No.
So what do you attribute that to?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, I've popped it in a couple different places. I've got some growing over there as well. But it does have, it's got some marigolds around it. I know that marigolds certainly can deter some pests. But it's got a lot of other things surrounding it. And, it seems like when you're not focusing on creating a monoculture and growing one specific thing, and you're growing lots of different things in companionship, you tend to have a lot, at least in my experience, a lot fewer issues with pests and diseases. So that's something that I have really enjoyed, and it's interesting to see that. Yeah.
The benefits of biodiversity.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, let's take a look at those
Yeah.
pollinators working
Oh my
on
gosh.
that
So
plant.
many up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really enjoying that.
Oh yeah.
And I try to let, any native wildflowers, as I see them emerging, I try to allow them to take hold,
Mm-hmm.
and just leave them in my garden space. So whenever I see things like asters
Mm-hmm.
or goldenrod or phlox popping up, I really try to just let it kind of do its thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's this, for those who won't be able to see this clearly, this is just being mobbed by honeybees and bumblebees and butterflies, other flies. It's, yeah, really amazing. This is a nice fall aster.
It
Yeah.
is. It's completely covered, isn't it?
Yep. Well, why don't let's keep going.
Yeah. And let's see here. So this is kind of a mixed annual and perennial bed. So I've got asparagus growing in here, and a companion of asparagus is cilantro. And so I've got cilantro in here. This is just self-sowed, and so it just kind of keeps coming back because it keeps going to seed and producing. So I just kind of let that go, and it produced all winter, of course, kind of with the climate kind of being what it is over here. But of course, it's pretty cold hardy.
And when you use that term companion, for again those who wouldn't know what that would mean exactly. So what makes for good companions?
So, there are certain plants that work well with others, either to attract beneficial insects to them or to deter things. And so oftentimes, like herbs, especially ones that are really fragrant, will be used to deter things. So cilantro is one of those, and parsley can be used, for that reason as well. But there are a lot of, different things you can kind of plant just to encourage or discourage. Or you can also plant companion plants to add nutrients to the plants that surround them. So
I guess also, just even before we go on, I mentioned pesticide use earlier. Do you use anything at all in terms of pest control? Right.
No, I don't. Yeah, everything is totally organic. The only things that I will use, of course, are neem oil. So I use neem oil on, all of my nightshades, so tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, that sort of thing. And then I'll also use like copper fungicide when I have any disease issues or fungus issues. And largely that's all that's needed. And so that's what's really interesting is when you create a really diverse space, you're inviting a lot of the beneficial organisms to enjoy your space and really work with you to achieve your goals. So for instance, I had no tomato hornworm issues this year. I had a couple of tomato hornworms, but I didn't find any living. They were all parasiticized and hanging there with the larvae hanging from them, or the eggs,
the cocoons.
Hanging from them.
Yeah, very cool.
So yeah, it's wonderful when you kind of create a really diverse space. You do end up having a lot fewer problems, it seems.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just important to point out too that we all see what's above ground and the diversity above ground and interactions above ground. The same stuff's happening below ground, right?
Absolutely. And that's been really interesting as well. Because, of course, throughout this whole process, the ground is all wood mulch. And so what I've done is I just get, deliveries from arborists of wood mulch, and I just kind of keep adding it to the space. And over time, of course, it ends up breaking down and create soil that I can then add straight to my beds if I'd like. And so that's helpful. But also, like you said, you're really taking care of all the life that exists below the soil surface. And so in doing this whole process, I have a hawthorn tree, and it was on what it looked like was its last leg when I first moved in. And it's still looking a little rough, but this year was significantly better. And what I thought was interesting, and I'd be curious if this was the reason, is that, all of this, it's inviting a lot of beneficial fungus to join the party. And so I'd be curious if perhaps then all of those resources, since the property kind of floats that way, if perhaps that reached that tree. And benefited it.
It's a reasonable hypothesis.
Yeah. So it is interesting to see once you kind of start taking care of the space, how everything then just flourishes as a result. Yeah. It's all connected.
Sure.
So, and let's see here. So those are pole hyacinth
Yeah,
beans.
let's take a look at those.
And those are really lovely. I mean, they almost look like orchids, the flowers themselves. But these are all volunteers from last year. Last year I had this whole thing covered in full hyacinth beans. And these all just came back up. So we've been enjoying those.
Yeah. Very nice. Very, very aesthetically pleasing too, right?
Yeah, I thought so. And these are all looking a little bit overgrown, but they are incredibly beneficial. So something that I get really excited about is just trying to see how much food and how much medicine you can grow in a small space. So one of the little additions I made last year is kind of adding little garden beds to just the corners, just the edges, and planting things like beans and, even planting some marigolds here and there. But, if you can grow something there, why not? So I really try to kind of pop things in wherever I can.
And then even these nasturtiums that we're seeing, right? Those aren't just for looks, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
So you can actually eat the nasturtium flower themselves. And then, of course, you can also use the leaves. They make a really beautiful pesto.
Right.
And then, of course, they're also, a really beautiful companion to most of our summer vegetables that, we grow here in Ohio. So I've got them dotted all along around my tomatoes. And these guys are all, looking a little rough now.
That's the end of the season, but they actually still look pretty good.
Yeah. And I'm kind of utilizing this space as a little nursery for some columbines that I grew this year, and I'll go ahead and transplant them probably in the spring, I'm guessing. And I've got a mom and her baby sunbathing in my herb spiral. And so this is she's such a sweetheart. She was one of the hens we hatched out on Christmas, actually. And she wanted to become a mother, and her eggs, I'm trying to think, I ended up replacing her eggs with fake eggs, and then I snuck these little guys under her.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so she's taken to them really well.
Oh yeah, she's mothering them out.
She is. She's doing a great job.
So how old are those chicks?
Those chicks, I think they're about a month now. And they're doing beautifully.
Now, do you know the variety of chicken?
So she's just a wild mix, just kind of bred between,
mutt, right?
Between mutts of mine. And then her babies are Aracanas, so they're little Easter eggers. So they'll produce green and blue eggs. So they're.
So tell me a little bit about the compatibility of sort of free range chickens in a permaculture setting like this. Do you get concerned about them eating what you're trying to grow, or when? And how much and so forth.
So certainly I don't usually actually let my chickens fully free range in the food forest, but these guys have a special place in my heart because they're babies, and they have actually just been kind of cleaning up the garden, actually. So this is actually a really good time to utilize chickens in the garden because they can jump in and, pick the tomatoes that have fallen to the ground and have started to kind of break down that we don't want. And so they actually have been helping out in here. They've been eating a lot of grubs, I've been noticing, and they haven't been eating a lot of the stuff that I would want to eat. Now, the stuff that I do keep them away from are things like my seedlings and my more desirable crops. I've got some kale growing in my little hoop houses here over the raised beds. And so I try to keep those closed when I know they're around to protect. But otherwise, they're just a really lovely companion. And of course, every time they go to the bathroom, they're just adding nitrogen to the space and then turning it right back in with their claws. So they do a lot of really wonderful work. Let's see here. And I don't know, this is looking a little rough, but this is my herb spiral area. And really what an herb spiral is, it's a spiral garden space that grows culinary and medicinal herbs, with the idea being that, because you have different heights and you have things kind of tucked behind, you end up creating different microclimates where, different types of vegetation with different types of requirements can all thrive in the exact same space. And so, for instance, we've got lovage kind of tucked here in the back a little bit out of the way of everything else, because of course it enjoys a little bit more shade than other things. So I've got that tucked over here, but we've got a whole bunch of stuff in here. We've got lemon balm, and I just tossed some columbines in here because I love them. I've got bee balm, which has the fungus, and I just haven't been spraying. I've got spilanthes. Have you ever tried?
No, I have not.
Yeah, so it's called the toothache plant.
Okay.
And basically you pop it in your mouth and you chew it, and it actually numbs your entire mouth and produces a really powerful salivatory response. So it's a medicinal thing. That's just a really fun thing to grow.
I've tried that with echinacea seeds.
Have you?
Yeah, echinacea seeds, if you chew them, they will numb your tongue and lips.
That's
yeah, so try that the next time you get a chance.
I will.
Yeah.
And then I've got oregano. I've got some hyssop here. I've got some thyme over there, and I've got rosemary, of course, still going. So it's a mix of, there's some chives in there, but it's a mix of annual and perennial herbs for that reason. And then let's see here. And then I really have been enjoying all the arches.
Yeah.
And so these have beans growing on them this year. And then on either side, we've got elderberries and then rhubarb on the ground.
It's nice when you can eat the walls of your landscaping.
Exactly. And then also I go ahead and will, at this point, I'm over beans. So I will let them just kind of dry out. And then I really like to create my own seed mixes with a whole bunch of dried seeds. And that way I can kind of control the weeds that grow all around my property. And so in spaces that are a little bit harder to weed, for instance, like the edges of the entirety of this space, I just planted and I just tossed very, very generously a whole bunch of bean seeds. I wasn't even careful. And they just kind of took over that whole space and allowed me to never have to weed this year.
Right.
And so then I was able to enjoy the secondary crop of beans on that end whenever I ran out, which clearly I didn't have an issue with running out this year.
Yeah.
But it can be kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, so you control the sort of weed you're going to have in your garden that year, right?
Yeah.
And it's an acceptable weed.
Exactly.
Yes.
It might as well be edible and medicinal, right?
Yeah.
So that can be good fun. And I can pop these open. And so this is just a brassica. So I've got kale and cabbage and leeks, and I still have some chamomile in here from the summer crops. But chamomile is a wonderful companion. Oh, go further this way. Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm going to get on that side.
That's right. This one.
There we go. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, but so, chamomile is actually a really wonderful companion to everything in here, as is borage, as is nasturtium, which is in here. And so this bed, I planted everything out with a little bit more intensive planting, and I've been harvesting the leaves as baby leaves just because it feels really decadent and wonderful. So I've just been eating a lot of baby kale. And then also what I did is, when I was done planting all of these, I went back with just a dried stalk of lettuce seeds, and just scattered them like a wild woman all up and down here. And I did the same with carrot seeds because both carrots and lettuce are companions of brassicas. And so they're starting to pop up. And so then what I'll do, of course, is just thin out accordingly in between. And I've also planted a whole bunch of onion bulbs in this space as well in between. And so with the idea of kind of taking up every possible square inch with food. And since they're all kind of sucking different nutrients from the soil, they're all able to thrive in companionship with one another. And, you're able to produce a lot of food in a small amount of space.
So what's the need for the hoop house?
So I added this for season extension so that in colder weather, we can continue to produce here in Ohio. And so all of these plants that are in here, for the most part, save for some of the summer things, are more cold hardy crops. However, you know, if exposed to extreme dips in temperature and multiple frosts, for instance, a lot of these things would, you know, fail to thrive. And they wouldn't do well, or they would just die. So having this on here creates a little, you know, greenhouse environment. It traps the heat and it traps the moisture, and allows all of these things to continue growing for far longer into the year than we would otherwise. And these were just very simple structures that I made just with rebar, 4-foot rebar, and I just pounded it in at even intervals, and then took 10-foot PVC and just popped it on.
Excellent.
So yeah.
Yeah, you can really feel even the difference between where you and I are sitting. And the inside is very different, very different.
Yeah, and when you open it up, you really can feel all the moisture just tumble out.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Here.
Now this is the kind of spot you don't want those chickens to get in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so I go ahead and I roll these down, and really it's a pretty warm day, so I should actually have all these up, but I will keep them down for the time being until I can vouch for the chickens wherever they are. And so this is something I put together because I was creating plans for individual clients. And what I realized is that it would just be a really helpful thing for everyone to have. So I put together this book of garden designs, and that's how I've planted out all of these gardens. I've utilized the principles in here to plant everything out. And so one thing I found is every year when I would go to plant, I would be racking my brain trying to remember, you know, how much spacing I need for this or for that. When do I plant this thing? When should I plant it by seed indoors? When should I plant it by seed outside? I mean, it's almost dizzying the amount of information that if you're a gardener that you kind of need to either retain or just continue looking up year after year. So I wanted to put something together that puts it all in one place. And so all of, you know, these designs, they like create the actual, they show you visually what to plant where, and then also how many of each thing and when to put them in the ground. And that can be really helpful. And then I also have it thought out so that you can actually stagger the planting, so that you don't receive all of your stuff at the same time. So anyway, it goes through spring and summer crops, and then also has fall crops. So it's just like plans for 4 raised beds, but it considers a lot of what we've talked about so far. So it considers a lot of companion planting principles, and then also explains how to utilize, you know, different plants for green mulch and that sort of thing. And then breaks everything down by crop as well to give you additional info. So these plans have been really helpful, and really to me, I printed this one out for myself because I use it I use it all the time out here.
For sure.
So that's been really helpful.
Very good. Well, so you introduced a term there, green mulch. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes. So, and actually I'm trying to think if there's, I don't have any, well, I do have some clover actually right over here. So should we switch spots again, or I don't know. But so anytime I have any clover pop up in my garden, I let it go. Because like I had explained earlier with strawberries, clover is actually also nitrogen fixing as well. And tomatoes are nitrogen loving. And so having the two, you know, thrive side by side is really beneficial. And so if you want, so this is kind of a living mulch, but if you want to provide green mulch for any of your crops, you're able to take any of these sorts of things and just kind of pull them and then place them all around whatever crop you're trying to, you know, you're trying to service. And so you'll just kind of put these around there, and it'll break down and over time, you know, supply those nutrients directly to the soil or directly to the plant. And you can do the same thing, for instance, with things like borage. That's another one that's really lovely. And so these edible, or these flowers, of course, are edible too. And they're kind of sweet and taste a little cucumbery. But you can actually take this, and it's also what's called a dynamic accumulator. And so it accumulates nutrients that aren't readily available to everything else, but it'll accumulate it in its leaves. And you can actually just chop the whole thing down and break it up a little bit and actually add it as fertilizer or green mulch around your food crops.
Right. Okay. So, you know, most people think about plants next to each other as competing with each other. So I would assume, you know, there are some things you don't want to be growing there and that maybe aren't providing that many benefits, and the net effect is a competition.
Right.
So there are, I presume, things that you see that you do take out of the beds as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, if I saw, because I did see a lot in here, I saw a lot of volunteer tomato plants popping up in here. And of course, I did pick those because they would compete with, you know, with the other tomatoes, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as I look around, I see a virtual lack of these typical weeds you see in backyard gardens. I really am not seeing the standard things. And so I think that's a testament to this sort of, you know, the permaculture design.
Certainly.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that is the beautiful thing, is really a lot of what would be considered stuff that you don't necessarily want around. I mean, really in this area, it's all edible or medicinal. So even the stuff I'm not a fan of, it still, you know, provides something, which is really helpful.
Sure.
So, yeah, I can take you down to the chicken area.
Sure. Let's do that.
These steps are a little rough, so be careful.
Okay. Well, here's the chicken run.
Yeah, so this is my chicken area. And I've got it separated into, so I've got one nucleus area. This is kind of their area they always have access to. And then I have 3 paddocks. And so I go ahead and rotate them between the 3 so that none of the areas get too devastated by their activity. And so at this point, they're allowed in this middle area primarily really because there's a lot more coverage for them from hawks. So they're able to get under a lot of these asters and hide when needed. So.
And I see you do have a rooster, right? Is that for protection and and so forth? Yeah.
Yeah. So I do have 2. I have 2.
Should I go near them?
Yes, you can. They're all very friendly.
Okay.
So I have 2 roosters. This is LBJ, little baby Jesus. He was born on Christmas. And then his father is over there, and he's a sweetheart. But yeah, that is, and I've got some little teenage chickens over there as well. But so yeah, this is so the whole idea with this space, in my mind, and the thing I love about permaculture is it's a really systems-based approach. And so in keeping chickens, my goal for this space is for it to ultimately be self-sustaining. So I would like for it to produce the bulk of the food to feed them for most of the year. And so the way that it kind of started, this space started with a problem. The problem being there was too much water running off of this surface and running down and getting everywhere. And so it had totally eroded the space and nothing was growing back here. It was always just a muddy, you know, mess. And so I decided that since the chickens live here, and also I will add that the chickens in part live here because the exhaust from my dryer goes into their area. So in the winter, then they're kept a little bit warmer, which is nice. But so I went ahead and decided, I wanted to do something with that because permaculture teaches us when there's a problem, oftentimes the problem also presents a solution if you're able to really kind of delve a little deeper. And so what I decided is, of course, these living creatures who live here, they require water. So the first order of business in dealing with the water situation is rainwater harvesting.
Oh yeah.
To actually provide the water that they need. And so that was kind of step 1. But of course, it can't take care of all of the water. And so we still have additional water coming off. And from this surface, the water still spills out. So they also need to eat, which we know. And so I decided to create what I consider a little chicken buffet over here. And so what I do is I take their bedding from their coop, and I'll just add it to this pile, this mixture out here. And then I add things from the garden. And then I also add, I've got some food scraps out here they'll be happy about. I add food scraps to the mix. And then what they do, of course, is they eat all of this, but then they also go ahead and turn it all together. So over time, after this area kind of fills up after a couple of weeks of doing this, I go ahead and I take all of this and I move it to a pile over here. Turning it then creates more food for them because they nab up any bugs or any, nibbles of things that they missed. And so that's a secondary, ability to get even more food. And then it gets turned a third time. And then, of course, we've got all of the seasoned compost that they have already turned out sitting here that I actually need to toss in some annual
So
beds.
how long did it take to get to that last bin from the start?
So it only took probably, I'm trying to think, maybe about 3 months. And that's actually quite a bit of compost. So, and it's been a very passive thing, at least for me. And so that's what I look for as a land owner. And so, just to have as little involvement from me as possible. And so they did all the work for me, which is wonderful. And so then also the water then, any additional water then gets captured and stored by all this organic matter here. And so then that takes care of additional, the additional water that is kind of taking over this area. And then a third layer to this is once the water kind of moves beyond there, then where does it go? I wanted to kind of trap it with some vegetation. So then I created this little area behind that housed things that had popped up on a volunteer basis in my garden that I knew, one, would put out a whole bunch of seeds and proliferate itself, and would grow really easily and well here. So I added things like lemongrass, and I added hyssop and tomatoes. I put some mullein in here. I also put some comfrey. And so what's been really beautiful is when all these little chicks were tiny, this whole area protected them from the hawks. And so they spent their days in there. And anyhow, so this is just, it's a way that I kind of, built this area up to be self-sustaining for them, but then also then takes care of my problem of having too much, water runoff. And sure, I could have dealt with this in a conventional way. I could have had someone come out and do drain tile for me. I could have done all of that, or I could create a whole system that then feeds myself and feeds itself.
I noticed on your coop there, you have a door. Is that automatic?
Yes.
Close? Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about that and why that's necessary.
Yes. So that's an automatic door, a door for the chickens, and it is photosensitive. And so it'll just immediately shut, when the sun goes down, and then pop up, in the morning, of course. And it's really important because of predators. So things like raccoons and even possums and coyotes, they will get in there and they will, eat chickens. So
anybody who raises chickens knows this. If you let them out, you might have a few go missing at times.
And so the long-term vision for this space is to plant things in here, and take things from the food forest up there. So take berries and other medicinals and kind of get them filling in these spaces so that over time they'll just go out and forage for all of their own food. And then in the back, I have plastic, landscaping plastic to kill the grass underneath, because my plan there is I have a pasture mix that I'm going to go ahead and seed that with for the chickens. And I have electric fencing that I will then keep them away from that while it establishes itself next spring.
Is that when you initially set up your food forest? How did you get rid of the grass?
So I sheet mulched everything. And so what sheet mulching looks like is just I took 2 to 3 layers of cardboard and you place it right on top of the grass. And the beauty of that is you're not disrupting all of the soil structure underneath, and you're not disrupting any of the life under there. And then you just pile on top of that, 4 to 6 inches of wood mulch. And then over time, that all begins to kind of break down, and it's inviting a lot of the beneficial organisms from the soil up to the top to kind of break all of that down for you. And then it's a perfect thing to then dig right into and plant right into. Yeah, and so that's how I transitioned that space. And I did it solo, and I did it, on very little money, because I kind of wanted to prove that, homesteading is something that really virtually anyone can do at any level, regardless of where you're at.
Right. So what's the acreage or square footage of your little homestead here?
So I have an acre here.
1 acre, okay.
Which I think is quite perfect. It's a really nice amount of space. And so, long term, I'm slowly just kind of trying to build up, my food production efforts, both annual and perennial. But long term, within the next 10 years, my hopes is to, produce about 80% of my own food. And so I'll just be adding a lot of other things, to this property over time. So pigs are gonna, come to this space, and so I'm gonna be building an area for them, and also planting out like a wood lot over there, like a nut lot over there, for them to be able to then forage the nuts over time.
Yeah, very nice. That was going to be one of my questions.
Yes.
Is what percentage of your own food do you take from this spot?
Yeah.
And whether you still go to the grocery store.
Yes.
I guess imagine for a few things,
Sure.
but
I do still go to the grocery store for a couple of things. But I mean, the long-term vision, especially in the summer, I rarely go to the store, and I buy a lot of bulk food. So I'll get, grains and some meat and that sort of, those sorts of things that way. More staple things.
And do you do the sort of standard preserving and canning and fermentation and all that as well?
Yeah. I do all those things, and then in the basement is where I store, do a lot of the cold storage. And just try to keep humidity at the right temperature, at the right percentage and that sort of thing to kind of keep everything happy. And so I do all of this, I homestead myself, but I also offer permaculture design and planning services for anyone who's interested in homesteading, or even just, planting a little bit of food or medicine for themselves. And so that looks like a couple of different things. So usually a client will reach out to me, and I'll go to their site or their home for a consult. And sometimes it's just a Q&A, sometimes they just have a ton of questions. They don't know where to begin. Maybe they just want one raised bed. They just don't know where to put it. So we'll discuss things like that. And then if they want something a little bit more in depth, and they want maybe a plan, then I can actually create customized plans for your space based on the things that you'd love to grow. And then with that, you get a design, like an actual visual design showing you where everything goes. But you also get a shopping list that tells you specifically how many of each thing to get. And then you also get a step-by-step installation guide to, give you insight as to how to bring your garden's dreams, to reality. And so you kind of get the whole thing, because I understand, nowadays, oftentimes we all have our 9-to-5s, and it's really difficult to homestead. It can be really difficult to garden if you don't have a lot of time to devote to it. And so I like to try to take the guesswork out of it and to create, to allow homesteading to be attainable for everybody. And so then also I have downloadable designs that I have recently started putting out that allow clients to actually just order and download and print the designs offline. And it comes with all of those same things. So you get the shopping list and the step-by-step guide and that sort of thing. So that can be for small gardens, that can be for annual gardens, it can be perennial gardens, but it can also be for homesteads. It can also be for farms, 5 to 10 acres, even more. So I do a lot of the planning for self-sufficiency, but again, I can also just come over for a consult. I can do garden coaching sessions and actually sit with you and care for your plants alongside you, just to kind of teach you how to care for and nurture the things that you're growing.
So how would people reach you and find these services?
So you can find me on my website, which is just humblehiveconsulting.com. And then you can also find me on Instagram and on Facebook under the same, at Humble Hive Consulting. And you're welcome to just reach out that way.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, it's been a pleasure to
Oh,
talk to you today,
likewise.
to be shown around your property and learn all these cool things. And folks out there watching this should take advantage of this. It's really awesome to be here and to see it.
Yeah.
It's great. Many
Well,
thanks,
I
Lauren.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay,
It was
take
wonderful
care.
having you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.